Brett Kavanaugh and the White House are denying new allegations from a second woman against the Supreme Court nominee. These allegations are published in The New Yorker. Deborah Ramirez, a classmate of Kavanaugh's at Yale, says that Kavanaugh thrust his genitals in her face at a dorm party and caused her to touch it without her consent as she pushed him away. Ronan Farrow, who broke the story with Jane Mayer in The New Yorker, joins us now. Ronan, thanks so much for being with us, and thanks for helping us try to understand the reporting here, which is very much part of the pushback against these claims this morning. So let me go right at that first, because in the very second paragraph, I think it is, of this piece, you note that Ramirez was reluctant at first to characterize Kavanaugh and his role, but after 6 days of reassessing her memories and talking to lawyers, she felt confident enough to come forward. So what does that mean, that at first she was reluctant to say this happened this way, but after 6 days of thinking about it, she came forward?
So I think it's important to note this is behavior that is not atypical in cases of trauma, in cases that stem from claims many years ago, and in cases that involve heavy drinking, which she readily admitted this was. This is a woman who did not come forward with a press release. Her story was recounted unbeknownst to her, to senators who began looking at this claim, and she was placed at the center of a firestorm. The fact that she took several days to carefully think about whether she wanted to cast herself into this maelstrom is, I think, certainly, an acknowledgement of the fact that there were gaps in her memory, as is so often the case with traumatic memories influenced by alcohol, but also an indication of her extraordinary degree of caution. This is not a woman who appears to be behaving in a way that suggests she has an agenda, that suggests she's making something up. This is a woman who is being very judicious and conservative in how she renders this allegation.
All right, so gaps in her memory, so people understand what exactly does she or did she remember and what did she not?
She remembers vividly Brett Kavanaugh laughing at her during this incident, pulling his pants up afterwards. Another classmate who she identified yelling down the hall, Brett Kavanaugh just put his penis in Debbie Ramirez's face. She remembers finding this extremely traumatic. She was devoutly religious. She had not engaged in this kind of activity before, and it was a significant incident for her. So much so that, even given the fact that she was inebriated, not blackout drunk, capable of remembering things confidently, but inebriated, this was something that always stayed with her.
But she doesn't explicitly remember the moment. Correct, Ronan, that Brett Kavanaugh...
She does remember the moment at all.
Okay.
She does remember the moment as well.
She does remember
She remembers the moment. She describes it in detail in the piece. I'll leave it to her rendering to describe that.
Very good. She does remember the moment. All right. And then just, again, one other piece about the reporting before we go back and discuss the substance here. You, again, state in the piece. In all the arguments against this, I should note, you lay out. It's not as if you were not very careful in explaining exactly what the doubts and the questions about this were. But you note that you have not confirmed with other eyewitnesses that Kavanaugh was at the party. Explain that.
So we called several dozen classmates who were around at the time in general. Many didn't respond. Many didn't wish to comment. Several were working, in fact, with Brett Kavanaugh's team and signed on to a statement saying, they didn't have direct knowledge of this, but they didn't think it was the kind of thing that he would have done, and we included that. It's worth noting that half of that list either were individuals she said were directly involved in this, were people who egged Brett Kavanaugh on as he did it, urging her to kiss it and other things, or the wife of one of those alleged assailants. But, we did include those statements, and there were several others who were not alleged to be involved who said, we trust Brett Kavanaugh on this. No direct accounts from that side. We did receive, however, several direct accounts from people who said they were told right after or saw her describing it right after, and who independently of Ms. Ramirez recounted the same fact pattern about Brett Kavanaugh doing this.
That's interesting, and that's something that doesn't always exist when you're dealing with allegations of sexual assault or allegations of sexual battery, correct?
I'm glad you make that point, John. This is a fairly high level of evidence for this kind of a case. When you look at the other reporting I've done, for instance, on sexual assault and harassment, the last story Jane Mayer and I did was about a Democratic politician, Eric Schneiderman, the New York Attorney General. And we used the same caution and standards there. very often there are not people in the room willing to speak in these cases. In this case, the primary people who were likely to be witnesses are people alleged to have been egging him on and to have been part of this, alleged misconduct against her. Now, we held this to the same careful standard, but I would say that this exceeds the evidentiary basis that we've used in the past in several cases that were found to be very credible ultimately.
Because you do know, and we have heard over the last, 12 hours since this came out, why did the New Yorker print this? If there are all these doubts, and I'm not sure the doubt's the right word, if there is no eyewitness confirmation, if no one can definitively say Brett Kavanaugh was there other than Debbie Ramirez, why did you feel so comfortable running with this story?
Two reasons. The first is there is a strong evidentiary basis. Her claim is corroborated, as you said, to an extent that is not always possible by people who did not know her, have not interacted with her, and yet independently recounted the same fact pattern. Some of those people are on the record in this story, so I'd point you to the piece. The other is, I think, the same reason that she decided to speak, John, which is this is a story that is out there on the Hill. It is being investigated. It is a matter of news whether she tells her own version of this story or not. That put her in an exceptionally difficult position. And I think, the public deserve to hear her version of this story because it will be a source of tremendous conflict on the Hill in the coming days.